The gym was alive that day with the sound of punches hitting pads, shoes sliding across the mat, and trainers shouting instructions. It was like any other busy afternoon, where students of all ages and skill levels gathered to practice. The smell of sweat, mixed with the faint scent of disinfectant, filled the air, and the mirrors along the wall reflected the movement of dozens of determined faces. Some were beginners, learning how to throw a proper kick, while others were advanced students sparring with intensity. Among them stood a man wearing a black belt. He was tall, confident, and carried himself with the kind of authority that comes from years of training. Everyone in the gym knew him. He wasn't just respected for his skills, but also for his playful nature. He liked making jokes, laughing with younger students, and keeping the atmosphere light when training became too serious. People often looked to him as a leader, and his presence always drew attention. Near the back of the room, quietly observing all of this, was a little girl. She was small, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with bright eyes that scanned the mat curiously. She wasn't training that day. She had come with her father, who was a student at the gym. While her father practiced drills with other adults, she sat cross-legged, holding her water bottle, watching the movements with fascination. No one paid her much attention. After all, she was just a child sitting in the corner. The black belt between his rounds noticed her. She looked so calm, almost too serious for someone her age, and it caught his interest. To him, it seemed like the perfect moment for a little fun, a harmless joke to entertain the group. He approached her with a grin on his face, his voice carrying across the mat as he called out, "Hey, do you want to fight me?" The students around him laughed. It was a ridiculous thought, a grown man, skilled in martial arts, challenging a little girl who barely reached his waist. Everyone assumed it was just a playful tease, something to lighten the mood. Nobody expected her to respond in any serious way. The girl looked at him, blinking for a moment, as if deciding whether or not he was serious. Her father chuckled nervously, shaking his head at the idea. The gym was still filled with the hum of chatter and laughter, but slowly people began to pay attention to the exchange. There was something different in the way the girl stared back at the black belt, not with fear, not even with hesitation, but with a kind of quiet confidence that didn't match her age. The black belt laughed again, waving his hands dramatically to keep the mood playful. "Come on, just for fun," he said, his tone light-hearted. The people around smiled, thinking it was just another one of his jokes, but in that moment, the ordinary rhythm of the gym began to shift. Though nobody realized it yet, the little girl's response was about to change everything. The gym, once noisy with drills and conversations, seemed to pause. Trainers, students, even those hitting heavy bags, started to glance over curiously. What was supposed to be a passing joke was slowly becoming the center of everyone's attention. The little girl's expression remained steady. She didn't laugh, she didn't look away. Instead, she slowly set her water bottle aside, adjusted her posture, and prepared to do something that would surprise the entire gym. The black belt, still smiling, had no idea that his playful challenge had just turned into the beginning of a story people would talk about for a long time. The gym was still buzzing, but the laughter from the black belt's joke lingered in the air. His challenge to the little girl had been meant as nothing more than light fun, something silly to get a few chuckles from the students. Most people expected her to giggle, shake her head, and hide behind her father. That's how children usually reacted when teased by adults in a playful way, but this girl didn't follow the script. Instead of blushing or smiling nervously, she tilted her head slightly, as if truly considering the question. The look on her face wasn't that of a child embarrassed by attention. It was focused, calm, and a little too serious for the moment. She locked eyes with the black belt, and for the first time, he noticed something different about her. There was no trace of fear. "Do you really want to fight me?" he repeated, still wearing a grin, trying to keep the energy light. His voice carried across the mat again, drawing more students' attention. Some of the younger members began whispering to each other, nudging one another, as if watching the start of a funny skit. Her father laughed nervously and patted her shoulder. whispering something in her ear, but the girl didn't turn toward him. Her gaze stayed fixed on the man with the black belt. Then, with a small nod, she gave her answer. "Okay." The room went quiet. At first, people thought they had misheard her. The playful giggles and chatter died down. Several students turned their heads, unsure if she was joking, but she wasn't smiling. She wasn't hiding behind anyone. She had said it clearly, in a steady voice that didn't sound like the words of a timid child. The black belt blinked, taken aback for a split second. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, really? You want to fight me?" he asked, playing into the moment, still believing this was all childlike innocence, but her nod was firm this time. Yes. The gym's mood began to shift. What started as a passing joke had suddenly turned into something else. Students stopped their drills. Trainers lowered their focus pads. Even the sound of gloves hitting bags came to a halt as everyone turned to watch. A circle of curiosity was forming around the girl and the black belt. "Come on now," her father said softly, trying to guide her back to her seat. "It's just a joke, sweetheart." But the girl shook her head, her eyes never leaving the man in front of her. There was a determination in her small frame that nobody had expected. The black belt, amused but also intrigued, scratched the back of his neck. He had sparred with hundreds of students, from nervous beginners to aggressive competitors. But this situation was entirely new to him. A little girl, with no hesitation stepping forward when most adults would back away. "All right then," he said with a grin, deciding to keep playing along. "But just a friendly spar, okay?" He raised his palms in a non-threatening gesture. "We're just having fun." The girl gave another small nod. She stepped forward, leaving her water bottle behind, and walked to the center of the mat. Her steps were steady, not rushed or shy. By now, the laughter had completely disappeared. The gym had fallen into an unusual silence, the kind that happens when something unexpected begins to unfold. Some people whispered from the sidelines, "She's really going to do it? Is this serious? She's so small. What's she thinking?" The black belt lowered into a relaxed stance, his smile wide, but inside he was beginning to wonder. Most children her age would giggle and then back out once attention turned toward them. Yet she didn't show the slightest sign of retreat. Her eyes stayed focused, her hands slowly raised into a guard position, clumsy perhaps, but deliberate. The little girl wasn't here for a joke. She had accepted his challenge in earnest. The man laughed lightly, trying to ease the strange tension that had settled over the room. "Okay, let's see what you've got." He expected her to rush clumsily, or maybe throw a playful slap. Something childish he could laugh off, but what he didn't realize was that the moment he had challenged her, something had shifted, not just for her, but for everyone watching. The gym wasn't looking at this as a joke anymore. They were curious. They wanted to see what she would do. Her father, still standing on the edge of the mat, looked torn between stepping in to stop her or letting it play out. But before he could act, the black belt bowed playfully, signaling the start of their little match. The girl bowed back. And when she straightened, her eyes were sharp, steady, and full of quiet fire. The black belt had meant it all as a harmless joke. He didn't know yet that the girl's response was about to turn that joke into one of the most unforgettable moments the gym had ever witnessed. The moment the little girl agreed to the fight, the energy in the gym shifted. What was meant to be a small joke now carried a strange weight, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The students who had been sparring stopped mid-action, some lowering their gloves, others leaning against the wall to get a better view. The trainers exchanged curious glances, silently asking one another if they should step in. But no one moved. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. The black belt, still smiling, crouched a little to make himself appear less intimidating. "All right, kiddo," he said lightly. "Show me what you've got." His tone was still playful, but his eyes studied her carefully now. The girl stepped onto the mat with slow, steady movements. She wasn't rushing, and she wasn't dragging her feet either. Her posture was straight, her chin slightly raised. It was clear she wasn't treating this as a joke. Her small fists came up in front of her face, forming a guard that wasn't perfect but showed signs of training. That was when the first wave of surprise hit the gym. "She knows how to stand," one of the students whispered. "That's not just random," another murmured. Her father, standing near the back, rubbed his forehead with worry. He'd taught her a few basics at home, little drills to keep her active, but he hadn't expected her to use them here in front of everyone. The black belt chuckled again, though softer this time. "Okay, nice stance," he admitted, nodding to her. He raised his hands too, keeping his movements exaggerated so she wouldn't feel pressured. "Let's begin." She wouldn't feel pressured. "Let's begin." For a moment, nothing happened. They just stood facing each other, the silence stretching across the room. The girl's eyes didn't blink, didn't waver. She was waiting for him to make the first move. Finally, with a grin, he stepped forward lightly and tapped her guard with his open hand, like a playful poke. Most children would have giggled, but the little girl reacted instantly. She swatted his hand away and shifted to the side, her feet moving in a surprisingly coordinated step. The black belt's eyebrows lifted. That wasn't an accident. The crowd stirred. Some gasped, others chuckled nervously. He tried again, tapping at her guard from the other side, testing her reflexes. Once more she blocked him, her arms snapping into place with quick precision. There was no hesitation in her movements. The black belt laughed, shaking his head. "Oh, you're serious," he said, half amused and half impressed. The girl didn't answer. She just adjusted her feet, her body angled like she'd seen older fighters do. Her expression was calm but focused, as though she was playing out a strategy in her mind. The black belt decided to push just a little more. He extended his leg in a slow, harmless sweep, a move so gentle it was practically a demonstration. He expected her to freeze, maybe stumble back. Instead, she hopped lightly to the side and tapped his leg with her own in return. It wasn't strong, but it was deliberate. The gym erupted in laughter and surprise. Not mocking laughter, but the kind that comes when something unbelievable happens. "Did you see that?" She countered him. "No way! How does she know that?" The black belt straightened, no longer grinning quite as wide. His playful attitude was fading into real curiosity. He had challenged her as a joke, but the girl wasn't joking at all. She wasn't just reacting randomly. She was applying actual technique, things she must have practiced before. Her father buried his face in his hands for a moment, torn between pride and embarrassment. He knew she had been secretly watching his lessons at home, copying his drills, practicing kicks and punches when she thought no one was looking. He hadn't realized just how much she had absorbed. The black belt circled her now, testing her awareness. He moved left, then right, and the girl pivoted with him, keeping him in front of her at all times. Her little feet shuffled with surprising control, like she understood the importance of not giving away her back. The gym had grown silent again, everyone caught in the unfolding scene. This wasn't a joke anymore. It was a real test, even if it was unplanned. Finally, the black belt decided to make a proper move, though still light-hearted. He extended a slow jab toward her guard. Without flinching, the girl brought her arm up and deflected it. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, she stepped forward and tapped his chest with her small fist. The room exploded in cheers and gasps. She landed one. "Oh my God, she hit him!" Unbelievable. The black belt looked down at her, blinking in genuine surprise. For the first time, he had felt her intention, not strength, but confidence. She wasn't swinging wildly. She was making choices. The girl stepped back calmly, her fists still raised. Her breathing was steady, her eyes sharp. The black belt laughed, but this time it was different. It wasn't the laugh of someone making a joke. It was the laugh of someone impressed, caught off guard. He gave her a small nod of respect. Around them, the gym had transformed. What began as a light-hearted challenge was now a silent lesson unfolding before everyone's eyes. Never underestimate someone because of their size or age, and this was only the beginning. The spar had begun as nothing more than playful teasing, but by now the gym felt like a stage where something rare was happening. Every eye was fixed on the black belt and the little girl. Some of the younger students sat cross-legged on the floor, their jaws hanging open, while the older fighters leaned against the walls, arms crossed. Trying not to show their astonishment, the black belt kept his hands raised, but his smile had softened into something else, respect mixed with curiosity. He realized that if he continued treating this as a joke, it might come across as insulting. So without losing his gentle demeanor, he decided to take her a little more seriously. "All right," he said, lowering his stance slightly. "Let's see what you really know." The girl nodded once, her guard still high, her small feet shifting on the mat. For a child, her movements carried a maturity that stunned the onlookers. She wasn't bouncing around or waving her arms randomly. She was focused, her eyes never leaving his. The black belt made the first move, this time faster than before but still controlled. He stepped forward with a quick jab. The little girl raised her arm, blocking it, and then darted to the side. The movement wasn't perfect, but it showed practice. She didn't just stand still and absorb the hit. She avoided it and created space. The crowd murmured, the whispers growing louder. Where did she learn that? She's actually moving like a fighter. She's not scared at all. The black belt turned, amused but also impressed. He came at her again, this time with a light kick aimed at her midsection. He was careful. It wasn't fast and it wasn't strong, but he wanted to test her awareness. To everyone's surprise, the girl didn't freeze. She lifted her leg and tapped his shin before his foot even landed. It wasn't powerful, but it was timed perfectly, like she had anticipated his move. Gasps and claps echoed through the gym. She counted him again. "No way, she's so young." The girl returned to her stance, breathing steadily, her face calm. Her small frame looked fragile against the black belt's tall figure, but at that moment she seemed untouchable. The black belt laughed softly and nodded. "You're good," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His tone was no longer mocking. It carried genuine admiration, but he wasn't about to stop there. He wanted to test her further, to see just how deep her instincts went. He shifted his weight and began circling her, his movements light and fast, like a predator testing its prey. Yet this time, the girl didn't look like prey. She turned with him, always facing him, her feet shuffling exactly as they should. "She knows how to pivot," one of the trainers whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. The black belt feinted, pretending to strike. Many beginners would have flinched, closing their eyes or stepping back too far. But the girl didn't budge. Her guard twitched, ready to react, but she didn't overcommit. She was calm, steady, waiting. "Unbelievable," someone muttered. Finally, the black belt decided to go for a light combination, a jab followed by a mock hook, nothing dangerous but faster than before. The girl blocked the jab, ducked clumsily under the hook and stumbled forward, almost losing her balance. For a second, the crowd thought it was over. But she caught herself, spun, and landed a light tap on his ribs with her tiny fist. The gym exploded with cheers. She did it again. "She's fearless. Look at her go!" The black belt froze for a moment, his mouth open in disbelief. Then he burst into laughter, clapping his hands together. "You got me," he admitted, bowing to her in respect. The girl straightened, her face glowing not with arrogance but with quiet pride. But the spar wasn't over yet. The black belt decided to push her one last time. He stepped in with a slow sweep of his leg, a move meant to test her balance. The girl hesitated for a fraction of a second, then did something nobody expected. She mimicked the motion. Her little foot swept across the mat, catching his ankle just enough to make him shift awkwardly. He didn't fall, of course, but he stumbled back a step. The crowd roared. The black belt stopped, staring at her. His grin widened, but his eyes carried something deeper now. This wasn't funny anymore. This was inspiring. He straightened and gave her a proper bow, one that showed true respect. The girl bowed back without hesitation. The gym erupted in applause, louder than before. The walls echoed with clapping and shouts. The students, the trainers, even her father couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. What had started as a playful challenge had turned into a spectacle no one would forget. The black belt placed a hand on her shoulder and said with a smile, "You've got the heart of a warrior." The girl's face lit up for the first time. She didn't brag or boast. She simply nodded, her eyes shining. She had stepped up to the challenge, faced someone everyone else admired, and held her ground. The whole gym had just learned a lesson that day. Never underestimate courage, no matter how small the package it comes in. The applause had barely faded when the black belt raised his hands again. "One more round," he said with a playful grin, though there was no denying the spark of seriousness in his eyes now. He wasn't trying to win. He had nothing to prove, but he wanted to see how far this little girl could go. The crowd leaned in, eager to watch the next exchange. The girl adjusted her stance once more, her feet sliding into position with careful precision. Her chest rose and fell quickly, but she wasn't trembling. If anything, she looked sharper than before, as though the energy from the cheering crowd had fueled her spirit. Her father stood near the edge of the mat, torn between pride and worry. He had wanted to step in earlier, to stop what felt like a risky game, but now he couldn't bring himself to interrupt. What he was watching wasn't reckless. It was history in the making. His daughter was doing something that would be remembered by everyone in the room. The black belt began circling her again, this time moving with more intent. His steps were quicker, his feints sharper. The gym had grown silent once more, the students barely daring to breathe. All that could be heard was the shuffle of their feet against the mat. The black belt struck first, a smooth jab aimed high. The girl blocked with her tiny arm, though the impact made her stumble back half a step. He followed with a slow kick to her side, testing her balance. She turned her hips and deflected with her shin. Clumsy, yes, but effective enough to show she understood the motion. The crowd gasped. She defended that. "No way, she's actually countering him." The black belt chuckled and nodded in approval. "Good," he said softly, almost to himself. Then he moved again, faster this time. A quick 1-2 combination. The girl blocked the first, but missed the second, the mock punch tapping her shoulder. She wobbled but didn't fall. Instead, she retaliated with a tiny kick to his shin. It was light, barely a touch, but the precision stunned everyone. The black belt stepped back, his grin wide. "Nice one," he praised, clapping once before resetting his stance. He was enjoying this more than anyone else in the room. It wasn't every day that a child taught a grown fighter something about heart. The girl's breathing grew heavier now. Sweat dotted her forehead, and her small arms trembled slightly from the effort of blocking. Yet her eyes never wavered. She stayed locked on him, refusing to give up. Then came the moment that silenced the gym. The black belt feinted left and threw a soft hook toward her right side. The girl ducked, not perfectly, but enough to avoid it, and in that split second, she launched forward. A small fist tapped against his chest, right over his heart. It was so quick, so unexpected that even he froze for a moment. The gym erupted in a roar. Cheers, whistles, claps, all at once. Students slapped the mats, trainers shouted in disbelief, and her father's eyes welled up with tears he didn't expect. She landed it clean. That was incredible. She's fearless. The black belt stepped back, his chest still tingling from the light strike. He bowed deeply, lower than before, showing her the respect usually reserved for seasoned fighters. "Well done," he said sincerely. The girl, flushed and sweating, bowed back with the same seriousness she had shown all along. She wasn't smiling, not yet. She was still in the moment, still in her zone, but the fight wasn't quite finished. The black belt raised a finger, signaling for one last test. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if warning her something bigger was coming. Then, with controlled force, he swept his leg in a low arc, a move designed to knock opponents off balance. The little girl reacted instinctively. She hopped to the side, just barely avoiding the sweep, then spun and extended her leg clumsily toward his. It wasn't powerful, but it brushed his ankle, forcing him to adjust his stance. For the second time, she had countered one of his sweeps. The gym went wild again. At that moment, the black belt lifted his hand in the air, declaring the match over. He wasn't going to push further. She had already proven herself beyond anyone's expectations. The crowd applauded once more, louder than before, their cheers echoing off the walls. The little girl lowered her guard and finally smiled, a wide grin spreading across her face. She looked over at her father, who clapped with both hands, his pride unmistakable. His daughter had just done something extraordinary, something even he hadn't dared to imagine. The black belt walked over, crouched down, and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "You," he said, his voice firm but kind, "are going to be amazing one day. Don't ever stop training." The girl nodded shyly, her cheeks flushed. For the first time, she seemed to realize the weight of what she had done. She wasn't just a spectator anymore. She had stepped onto the mat and silenced an entire gym with her courage. The black belt stood, turned to the crowd, and raised her hand like she was a champion. The gym exploded in applause once again. Even those who had doubted, who had laughed at the idea in the beginning, were now cheering louder than anyone else. That round had started as a simple test, but it ended as a lesson. Everyone in the gym had learned something valuable. Strength isn't only measured in size or experience. Sometimes it's about heart, courage, and the refusal to back down, and the little girl had all three. The spar had ended, but the energy in the gym still pulsed through the walls. Everyone had witnessed something unforgettable, yet no one seemed ready to return to their own training. The black belt stood tall, breathing a little heavier than before, but his eyes glowed with pride as he looked at the little girl. She had surprised him, humbled him even, and that was not something that happened often. The girl, still flushed from the effort, lowered her fists and wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve. Her smile was small, almost shy, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She knew she had done something extraordinary. She had faced someone far bigger, far stronger, and she hadn't backed down. The gym, however, wasn't finished with her yet. "Come on, let's see more." Her voice shouted from the crowd, "Let her show us one of her moves." Another student added, clapping in encouragement. The girl blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected the attention. At first, she shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking toward her father. But her father smiled warmly and gave her a nod. "Go on," he said softly, his voice filled with pride. "Show them what you can do." The black belt grinned. "Yes," he agreed, stepping back to give her space. "Demonstrate something for us." "The stage is yours now." The little girl hesitated for only a second before stepping into the center of the mat. She adjusted her stance again, small feet planted firmly, fists raised. She looked around the room, and for the first time, she realized the gym wasn't laughing at her. They were cheering for her. Her confidence grew. She took a deep breath, then launched into a series of kicks she had practiced countless times at home. They weren't perfect, but they were sharp and fast for her age. Each kick snapped through the air with surprising accuracy, and when she finished, the gym erupted in applause once more. The trainers exchanged glances, nodding in approval. One of them leaned toward the black belt and whispered, "This kid has natural talent. She's not just copying, she understands." The black belt smiled knowingly. He had seen hundreds of students walk through these doors, but only a few carried that spark, that rare blend of courage and instinct. This little girl had it. "All right," he said, clapping his hands. "Let's give her a real drill." He gestured to one of the assistants to grab a focus pad. When the pad was brought over, the black belt held it in front of him. "Kick here," he instructed. The girl nodded, pulled her foot back, and kicked. The sound echoed through the gym louder than anyone expected. The black belt raised his eyebrows. "Again," he said. She kicked again, sharp, fast, confident. The crowd cheered. "Harder!" Someone shouted. The girl's face tightened with determination. She took another deep breath, lifted her leg, and delivered a kick that snapped so cleanly against the pad that even the black belt's hand jolted back. He grinned, shaking his hand slightly from the sting. "She's got power," he said loudly, so the whole gym could hear. "Serious power." The little girl beamed now, her earlier shyness replaced by pure pride. For once, she wasn't just the quiet child sitting in the corner watching others. She was the star of the room, the one inspiring gasps, applause, and admiration. Her father clapped the loudest, tears threatening to escape his eyes. He had always known his daughter was determined, but seeing her courage in action, Seeing her take on a black belt and then command the floor was beyond what he had ever imagined. The black belt lowered the pad and crouched down so he could look her in the eye. "Listen to me," he said in a serious but kind voice. "Don't stop training. You have something rare. One day you could be better than all of us." The girl nodded shyly, her cheeks flushed again. "Okay," she whispered. The gym erupted into another round of applause, and several students came over to pat her shoulder or give her high fives. Even the trainers lined up to bow to her, a gesture of respect that left her speechless. But the black belt wasn't done. He stood tall again and faced the crowd. "Let this be a lesson for everyone," he announced. His voice carried across the room, strong and clear. "Never underestimate anyone, not because of their size, not because of their age. True strength isn't always visible at first glance. It comes from the heart." The gym fell silent for a moment, everyone letting those words sink in. They had all laughed when the challenge was made, but now they understood. What they had witnessed wasn't a joke. It was courage. It was determination. It was proof that greatness could be found in the unlikeliest places. The little girl, standing quietly at the center of the mat, had just silenced the entire gym, not with her size or strength, but with her bravery and spirit, and deep down, every single person in that room knew they would never forget it. The little girl stood in the center of the mat, her chest rising and falling, her cheeks flushed from the effort. Around her the gym was alive with clapping, cheers, and excited voices. But slowly the noise began to die down. The applause softened until the room grew quiet again. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from boredom. It was the kind of silence that comes from awe. Every single person in the gym had just seen something that challenged what they believed about strength, size, and courage. The students, some of them teenagers twice her height, looked at the little girl not as a child, but as an equal, maybe even as a role model. The trainers folded their arms, nodding with approval, their faces showing the kind of respect they usually reserved for fighters who had trained for years. The black belt stood across from her, no longer grinning or treating the situation lightly. His eyes were serious, focused, almost reverent. He'd started this as a joke, a harmless tease to entertain the crowd. But now he realized he had given her a stage to show her spirit, and she had stolen the entire show. He stepped forward slowly, the mat creaking beneath his feet, and extended his arm toward her. The little girl hesitated, unsure what he meant. Then he took her small hand in his and raised it high above her head like a referee declaring a champion. The gym erupted again, but this time it wasn't playful cheering. It was a roar of respect, the kind of sound fighters only hear after a hard-earned victory. She won. She's amazing. That was unbelievable. The girl's smile widened, her eyes shining with joy. She had never been in the spotlight before, but now she was standing in the center of it, her hand raised in triumph by someone everyone admired. Her father clapped until his palms stung. Pride swelled in his chest so much that he thought he might burst. For years he had trained quietly, always hoping his daughter might take an interest in martial arts. But now he realized she hadn't just been interested. She had been absorbing everything, watching, learning, waiting for her chance to show what she could do. The black belt lowered her hand and bowed deeply to her once again. This time, the bow was slower, more meaningful. It wasn't just a gesture of politeness, it was recognition. "You are a warrior," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Never forget that." The words sank into the crowd. Some of the younger students shifted uncomfortably, realizing that they had laughed at her earlier. Others felt inspired, their minds racing with the idea that maybe they too could be braver, stronger, more determined if they gave it their all. The little girl bowed back. She didn't say anything, but her expression spoke volumes. She didn't need to brag. She didn't need to explain herself. She had proven everything on the mat. Then came a moment that nobody expected. One of the trainers stepped forward, clapping slowly. "From now on," he said with a smile, "this girl trains here for free." The crowd cheered again, louder than ever. The little girl's eyes went wide in surprise, and she looked quickly toward her father. He was frozen for a moment, his mouth open in shock, before he laughed and nodded gratefully. The black belt placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "If you train, if you keep this fire alive, you will become stronger than you can imagine. But more important than strength is the courage you already showed today. That is something no one can teach. That comes from inside." The girl nodded slowly, her heart pounding. For the first time, she realized what she had done. She hadn't just defended herself. She hadn't just surprised the black belt. She had silenced an entire gym filled with experienced fighters, not with power, but with courage and spirit. The silence returned, but it was different this time. It was heavy, meaningful. Everyone in that room was reflecting on what they had just witnessed. The trainers thought about the years they had spent perfecting techniques. The students thought about the excuses they had made for themselves when training got hard. And the father thought about how, in one single moment, his daughter had reminded him why martial arts mattered, not for trophies, not for belts, but for heart. The girl stood there quietly, soaking in the energy of the room. She didn't know what her future would look like, but in that moment she felt unstoppable. Finally, the silence broke with a single sound, the black belt clapping. The trainers joined in, then the students, until the entire gym shook with applause once more. But this time it wasn't just cheering for a performance. It was respect, pure and powerful, aimed at the smallest fighter in the room, who had just taught them the biggest lesson of all. The black belt leaned down one last time and whispered so only she could hear, "You silenced them all. And that's something even I couldn't do today." The girl's smile widened again, her eyes glimmering. She didn't need to say a word. Everyone already knew. The gym was alive with energy long after the spar had ended. Students who had once laughed at the thought of a little girl stepping onto the mat now spoke in hushed, almost reverent tones. The trainers kept shaking their heads, still amazed at what they had witnessed. And at the center of it all stood the girl, small and quiet, yet carrying herself like someone who had just shifted the balance of the entire room. Her father approached slowly, his eyes filled with pride that words could not capture. He crouched down beside her and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You were incredible," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "Do you know what you just did?" The girl tilted her head, unsure how to answer. To her, it had been simple. She had been challenged, so she responded. She hadn't thought about fear or about the size of her opponent. She had only thought about trying her best, but the others had seen something much larger, a moment that would stay with them for years. The black belt, still standing nearby, placed a hand on her shoulder once again. "Today," he said, his voice firm, "you reminded all of us why we train. It's not just about strength. It's not just about belts or trophies. It's about courage. And you showed more courage than most adults ever will." The crowd clapped softly, nodding in agreement. Some of the younger students looked at the girl with wide eyes, as if seeing her as a hero. A few of the older fighters even felt embarrassed, realizing they had underestimated her before she had even stepped on the mat. The little girl lowered her gaze shyly, but inside her chest, her heart swelled. She hadn't meant to teach anyone a lesson. She had only wanted to prove to herself that she could accept the challenge. And yet somehow she had taught the entire gym something they would never forget. The black belt turned to the group, his voice carrying across the mat. "Remember this moment," he told them. "Strength without respect is nothing. Power without humility is empty. But courage, true courage, can silence even the loudest room." And that's exactly what she did today. The silence that followed was heavy, meaningful. Every student, every trainer, even her father, let the words sink deep into their hearts. Then, one by one, the fighters around the gym began to bow toward the girl. Not as a joke, not as a gesture of politeness, but as a sign of respect. The trainers bowed, the students bowed. And finally, her father bowed, tears glistening in his eyes. The girl stood still, unsure at first, but then she returned the bow, her movement small but graceful. The respect she received in that moment was unlike anything she had ever known. Afterward, the gym slowly returned to normal, but nothing truly felt the same. Conversations buzzed about what had just happened. Some students admitted they felt inspired to train harder, to take martial arts more seriously. Others said they would never again underestimate someone based on their size. Her father took her hand as they left, but before stepping out the door, the black belt called after her. "Remember, little warrior," he said, smiling warmly. "This is just the beginning." She turned and gave a small nod. No words were needed. The message had already been written in the silence of the gym. That day became a story told again and again within those walls. Students who hadn't been there would hear about it from those who had, and the tale grew each time. "Do you remember the little girl who sparred with the black belt?" They would say. She silenced the whole gym, but beyond the story, the lesson lived on. Every time a new student joined, nervous and unsure of themselves, someone would point to the mat and say, "Don't worry. If a little girl could stand up to a black belt, you can stand here too." The girl didn't know it then, but she had changed something in that room forever. She had shown that courage has no age, no size, no limit. She had proven that even the smallest voice can echo the loudest if it speaks with heart. And though she returned to being just a child outside the gym, holding her father's hand, drinking from her water bottle, tying her shoelaces, inside, she carried something far greater, the knowledge that she had faced a challenge most would run from, and turned it into a moment of unforgettable respect. The gym may have been noisy before, filled with shouts and laughter, but it was in silence that her true strength was revealed, and for everyone who had been there that day, the memory would remain clear. A black belt had challenged a little girl as a joke. What she did next silenced the whole gym. She did next silence the whole gym.